Good afternoon, everyone, and sorry for the slight delay. We're just waiting for the webcast to be switched on, which I've been confirmed that it has now been switched on. So, first item on the agenda is Chair's announcement. Just one thing, I've agreed to take one urgent item under any other business, and that's the PCC has advised me it's now got the precept through, so the figure. So I thought that might be of interest to panel. So we'll take that very briefly at the end of the meeting. Item 2 is apologies for absence. Anita.
Apologies received from Parisha Chavda, the independent member.
Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest they have in business on the agenda? No. Okay, thank you. On to item 4, the minutes of the last meeting held on the 26th of September, Appendix A. I'm happy to move the minutes a correct record. Anyone seconding? Thank you. Okay, we're all happy to accept those minutes. Okay, thank you. Progress on actions from elsewhere on the previous meeting, not elsewhere on the agenda. There's nothing for me to bring forward. Received no questions from the public. So we'll move on to item 7, which is the review of the Commission Services Report, Appendix B, page 17. Mr. Matthews.
Well, thank you, Chair. In many ways, I'm sorry to have to bring this report to the panel. I'd imagine everyone here was shocked by the contents of the report. It's a big report. It's dense, it's heavyweight. I don't intend to go over all the contents verbally. I'm assuming everyone here has read it, otherwise we'd be here for absolute hours. After taking up post as Police and Crime Commissioner, one of the things that I will admit I struggled with was to try and find a coherent strategy within the commissioning service of the OPCC. Working on that over a long period of time, some months, it became clear that the situation I'd inherited was failing to meet the high standards that the people of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland justifiably expect from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. As shown in the report, there were clear systemic failures, a lack of due diligence, a lack of adequate record keeping, a lack of consistent decision making, a lack of certainty over value for money, and a lack of accountability. These are all things that a Police and Crime Commissioner doing his job properly should be aware of and uncover, and that indeed is what I managed to do. So this report is about learning the lessons of the past, putting things right and ensuring that in future, national best practice is put in place in the Leicestershire OPCC. That is why we're putting forward a strategy that will deliver properly for the people of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. We are aiming to deliver a coherent strategy, clear monitoring of performance, proper record keeping, rules-based decision making, value for money, and adequate assurance of accountability. I would like to thank Charlotte Highcock and her team for the huge amount of work spread over thousands of hours, I would suspect, in order to get us to the position where we are today, that I'm able to bring this report to the panel confident that in future we will be running the commissioning strategy as I have outlined. I would hope you will all join me in approving the strategy outlined in this report, and I look forward to delivering to you and to the public a clear, efficient and effective commissioning strategy from the OPCC. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just a comment from me before I open it up for questions. It hasn't been a pleasant read, to be honest, reading through that, seeing what appears to have been a commissioning and contract strategy that was in a right mess. And for me, the first thing that came to mind was a mismanagement of public funds. So I'm really grateful that you have looked into this, ensuring that the mess has been uncovered and are rightly sorting it out. I think from my various experience, I think parish councils carry out more due diligence for the grants that they give out to the public sector than appears to have happened here. And yeah, I would like to say to Charlotte, fantastic report, really clear what's been happening and what it is going forward. So thank you for your hard work for sorting out and obviously future-proofing the commissioning and contract system and strategy going forward. And I think, yeah, I'm wholly in support of this. So I'm happy to take any questions from members. Mark.
Yeah, I'll take that if that's okay. Thank you for the question. To be honest, it does appear to have been a systemic issue, and I would say that it's we found evidence from at least 2015, if not prior to that. We kind of had to create a date at which we would sort of cut off where we would look into. So really, yeah, from around 2015 onwards, we were finding issues with contracts, record keeping, data management, all of those sorts of things. But I would say, you know, it's up to and including sort of even more recently, sort of June, July time is when we really started to make these changes. Thank you.
Sarah?
I pressed it once, it didn't work. Okay, I was really surprised reading elements of the report. It must have been very difficult to pull together given how new the vast majority of people in the office who were looking at commissioning was, and I'm conscious that that organisational memory can make a huge difference when you're looking at commissioning where things are kept. And I suppose that's probably why things like there being, it says in the report, there's no process for the assessment of that's actually on the website still. So I'm a little bit confused as to why the team couldn't find it when it's still on the website. So there's elements like that made me a little bit unsure about what had been uncovered, and how much of it was that lack of organisational memory because of the massive churn of staff and the turnover that you've seen in the office. So there were other bits as well that didn't quite jar correctly with me, and I just checked with various other bits. So talks around specifications for contracts. Certainly the MOJ have changed changed some time ago what they wanted, and they no longer wanted the sort of requirements that you'd set out in the report. They wanted a needs assessment, and that's what they specify in there. So asking for one thing when that isn't what the financial source actually wants doesn't make any sense. And it seems to suggest that. I'm also conscious there are elements here that are COVID specific. I think we'll find in many of our organisations things were put in place to make sure that processes could continue during COVID when people were working from home, making sure that opportunities were able to be, that financial opportunities, particularly to grants that we're supporting out in our communities, were able to be done. So I wasn't surprised that there was some photographs of contracts. That I think has happened in a number of different organisations and then things backed up later. So it did read to me like there was a number of elements in this that I wasn't sure were quite as robust as I'd hoped they would be coming to the panel. And I suppose the final point, Chair, is just around the audit process. So previously, there has been a full audit report that I understand of commissioning that's come to the panel, and that didn't highlight these issues. So if these issues are going back that length of time, I would question the audit panels, the audit information that's been brought previously. And I understand there was due to be a full audit of this function back in February, an independent audit of it. Has that happened, and will that be being brought to the panel?
If I may, I'll hand over to Charlotte again for detail. I think it's worth pointing out that this report is very largely about trying to get things right in the future. I think that is where we want to be. However, I would be remiss, Chair, if I didn't pass on that for months after I took up office, I was repeatedly assured that everything was absolutely okay in commissioning, that I didn't need to poke about in it, that I didn't need to go into any detail, everything was absolutely fine. And it was only after several small but I thought significant things came to light that I decided that really we did need to go into this in a lot of detail. So yes, in the past there have been repeated assurances made to me that everything's absolutely fine, and quite clearly that wasn't the case. But Charlotte, you might want to take up the detail.
Yeah, thank you. So just I suppose on the really sort of specific points around sort of things like record keeping, you're right, some of it is COVID responsible for things like photographs of contracts, but as you also said, we would have expected that to be backed up later. That wasn't the case. So on that element, we were still very much kind of left in the lurch when I took up the post. In terms of sort of things like seeing specifications in contracts, whilst that's the MOJ element of the grant funding and what their requirements are for those contracts. The requirements that we have with the core funding commission services that we provide, and also the grants that we provide, we do need a specification in those contracts, because otherwise the way that our contracts are laid out, it doesn't otherwise say what the contract is actually for. So it was really difficult at times to be able to look back through what we had funded and why, and you know, kind of similarly that then sort of led on to those points around monitoring and being able to kind of sort of hold providers to account on what we had asked them to deliver. So that's really why those points are in there. Really, it's not necessarily around, as Rupert was saying, it's more around sort of moving towards the future rather than systemically looking at pinpointing any particular element of fault there.
Oh, there we go. 3 times this time. It's going to be an issue, isn't it, this afternoon? And thank you for that. I mean, I think it's interesting that you say this is forward-looking. It doesn't read that way, and I think, in fact, the Chair's comments at the beginning suggest something else. And I think that recognition of both where you find and understand information from and what impact COVID had in terms of changes and what different requirements there are is really important. I am concerned going forward. We have seen in the time in the last 18 months, for example, the contract around the domestic abuse helpline has seen some massive challenges in being set up, and around the contract monitoring of that and how that's done. I think it would be really helpful for the panel to see the contract performance and how monitoring is being done going forward, but also that independent audit to come back, because it's interesting that you point to issues going back to 2015. As I say, there has been independent audit work done since then, and the fact that that didn't highlight it really does create some challenges, I think, in terms of the veracity of some of this and how much of it is accurate as to what you have been able to see in the office at this time, and how much of it is actually maybe held much broader in the organisation. I'm conscious that the OPC's office doesn't operate in a vacuum. It operates within a wider force, and information is shared and held in a number of places. So I think it's really helpful to know that this is going to be more about looking forward, and that actually some of the information in here might not be quite as presented in terms of recognising some of the impacts that COVID and other things have had and other funding requirements have had in previous years.
Thank you, Chair. I can assure the panel that everything in this report is actually as it is presented. I would not bring a report to this panel unless I had gone over it very carefully with those members of staff responsible for bringing things together. And I think it's a great shame the council is perhaps trying to impugn the veracity of this report. If the panel would like a future report on how we are doing monitoring and how we're managing things, perhaps with specific reference to the domestic abuse thing, perfectly happy to do that, Chair. I haven't got a problem with that whatsoever. As regards past audits, I wasn't here, so I can't comment on what was going on at that point. I can only comment on what we have uncovered since I took up office and since I started to look into the commissioning sector in rather more detail than perhaps I was being encouraged to do so.
Okay. Any other questions from any other members? Okay, just one point from me on page 24. It does say back in 2019 that one provider admitted to not spending their awarded funding from 2019. Was that a large amount of money or a small amount of money, and have they paid that back?
It was in relation to a former Commissioner's Safety Fund grant, so it was around £10,000. We have since made contact with them to retrieve that money back, yes.
And we convinced that it's going to be coming back to us yet? Are they happy to give it back if they've not spent it? Okay, well, that's good news. Okay. That's really worrying, that an award back in 2019 that they actually told you that they hadn't spent it, that hadn't been followed up. So there's no other questions. We'll move on to item 8, which is the Local Criminal and Justice Board, Leicestershire, Rutland, Appendix C, page 39.
Thank you, Chair. As members of this panel may be aware, for some years, the East Midlands has operated a regional Criminal Justice Board, and traditionally that has been chaired by the Leicestershire Police and Crime Commissioner. On taking up office, I inherited the chairing of the Regional Criminal Justice Board. However, it soon became clear that a majority of the newly elected PCCs were of the opinion that that arrangement was cumbersome and was failing to deliver the results required by the public. Having chaired the organisation myself for a while, I agreed with that analysis, and it's because of that that the Police and Crime Commissioners across the East Midlands have decided to introduce individual criminal justice boards, one for each force area. I cannot emphasise enough how important the work being done by force-based collaborations with local criminal justice board are to the people of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. It is inexcusable that cases are taking years to come to court, some of them to do with domestic abuse and rape, which are of course particularly sensitive. Victims are left waiting for justice, witnesses face months of uncertainty, and the accused have to wait a very long time to discover if they are found guilty or not guilty, and if found guilty, what their fate will be. People of the East Midlands have been let down, and I am not prepared to accept that. I will do everything in my power to put the situation right. I want to see more offenders being brought to justice, more victims giving closure, and the public reassured that the system is once again working properly. I want to see the backlog of cases cleared. I want to see the process of justice speeded up. It was the great Liberal Prime Minister William Gladstone who in 1868 was thundering on the inadequacies of the justice system of his day, who told the House of Commons, "Justice delayed is justice denied." He was right then, and he is right now. Some of the actions required will be within the gift of the Leicestershire Police, for instance, improving the quality of police files. Some of the measures can be provided by the OPCC itself in terms of victim and witness support. But much of the work that needs to be done will be done by the partners in the criminal justice system who will be sitting on this local criminal justice board. The board allows for cooperation and mutual support that is tightly focused on the needs of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. I hope very much that the panel will support the decision to create a force-based local justice board. And on a slightly lighter note, I can assure this panel that I have repeatedly told everybody who will listen to me that the LCJB is not the Leicestershire Criminal Justice Board, but the local Criminal Justice Board, so that those people from the city of Leicester and from Rutland don't feel left out. Thank you.
So can I just clarify that the regional board is being disbanded and all those regional partners will have their own individual one?
The decision that was made was that each force area would set up its own local criminal justice board. The regional body, we decided, would continue for a year to meet less frequently, only if the members decided. Some of the members of it were thinking, well, there might be a case for a little bit of regional cooperation. To date, it hasn't met because nobody has thought it worthwhile. So I suspect that it will be dissolved, but that is not my decision to make. That is for the regional board itself to make that decision. But it looks like that's where it's going, yes.
Thank you. Any questions? Sarah?
Oh, first time this time. So a couple of ones. First of all, I completely understand the desire to do this at a local level, but how confident are you that the various agencies that operate on a wider footprint than Leicester, Leicester and Rutland will be able to give it the time and attention alongside all the other boards across the East Midlands and for some of them nationally as well, that they would want to do so? And also where it comes to some of the specialist courts where we do share them across a regional basis, particularly looking at sexual violence and the specialist support that victims need around that, how will that be done beyond the footprint?
Thank you, Chair. Well, very confident, I think, is the answer to that. The system of having local criminal justice boards works elsewhere. It works very well. And as I just indicated, the regional body has sort of been continuing to exist in a shadow form to be resurrected if anybody feels the need. And so far, nobody has felt the need. So it doesn't look as if it doesn't look as if the councillors concerns are reflected by the professionals working in the system. But of course, my concern absolutely is for the welfare of the people of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, getting the criminal justice system that they deserve, getting the criminal justice system that they want. And this is something which has been brought forward because the existing system was felt not to be working right. It is something that will be constantly monitored. As I'm sure everybody here is aware, monitoring of performance is one of the bees that I have in my bonnet and something I'm very serious about. And it will continue to happen. If at any time it would appear this system isn't working, we will look at it again.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, I've got a question, a couple of questions with regards to the membership of the local criminal justice board for Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. Who and what do they represent? So the members of the criminal justice board, who are they? And where will they be coming from? And who determines the membership of the board? So those are my questions.
The membership is made up of institutions. So the magistrates' courts, for instance, send a representative. The judges send a representative. The police send a representative. The defence barristers send a representative. So the members are not individuals, they're institutions. Who they send is up to them. So I would not dream of telling the defence barristers who they should send. What I hope, of course, is it is always the same person, because again, we were talking about institutional memory earlier, and it's the same with individuals. If it is the same individual attending every time, they will remember what's happened before, they will be aware of the issues, they will know what's going on. So the answer to your question is, it's the various institutions that are involved in the criminal justice system across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, each of whom then chooses which representative comes along. We have invited everybody we could think of who should be present. I think, have we had replies from everybody, or were there still a few outstanding? No?
I'm not sure, but they've been sufficiently senior enough to make strategic decisions at the meeting.
Yeah, okay, they are. We're still waiting to hear from a few, but yes. But again, Chair, you know, if you want us to come back to this maybe in a year's time to explain to the panel how it's working and what's being achieved, perfectly happy to do that.
Thank you. Lee?
Thank you, Chair. I really welcome this, Mr. Matthews. I think certainly from a trauma perspective, the backlog that we have for perpetrators in our area is significant, and having the probation officer come along to say how frustrated she is, and it's just such her work is so overwhelming. So I really welcome, I know small steps, isn't it, but I really welcome your words, and I commend them, you know, and I think it's great to have this process on the go. So thank you.
Thank you. Les?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Matthews actually already preempted something. So I do not understand and know enough about the system and its history to know whether it's the right or the wrong thing to do. So what I would be interested in, I note in your own report, the governance is you are going to review every 6 months. Actually, if you've already indicated, if panel is happy for you to report back, I think that's going to be absolutely essential. So we do know what the outcomes look like and the success rates. Kind of sitting aside of that would be how we're performing therefore compared to the other local criminal justice boards, and are they seeing a similar level of success or not as successful? But equally, and I would therefore have a bit of concern about the regional bit, is the cross-fertilisation of information and ideas and opportunities and successes and you know, county lines don't operate in a silo, they operate across counties by default, hence they operate everywhere, but that's a separate issue. But I think there is a need, I think, Chair, if Mr. Matthews is happy, is to probably give it time to run, so within around about a year to actually come back and say, here's our success rate, these are the things we've achieved, these are the things where we've hit barriers, and by comparison to our neighbouring authorities, this is where we sit. So I think that would be really informative. So thank you, Rupert. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, happy to give that assurance, and if it helps the council, I can assure him I meet with my fellow regional PCCs on a regular basis, both as a group and individually, and indeed with PCCs from outside of the East Midlands, because of course Leicestershire does share a border with counties that are not in the East Midlands, and so it's important for me to maintain those links, and I can assure you that I do. Thank you.
Yeah, a couple of those points I was going to pick up as well. We get regular updates, but also about outcomes for LLR as well as our benchmarking across the region as well, I think would be helpful. So yeah, if you could come back in at any year's time with that, with the report covering that, that would be great. I think. Any other questions, Keith?
That's it. Thank you. Yeah, again, you mentioned quite clearly about justice being served and so on, and it's welcome that you're going to try and move that forward. But the difficulty that I have is that as a retired magistrate, you talk about justice, and the judicial system went through a very serious cuts in their budgets, serious enough that it delayed justice quite significantly. And having sit there with the legal advisors and the justice system in it as a whole, I still talk to those solicitors and one barrister about the cuts, which are still there and still not been put back. So it's all right to say what you want to do and everything else, but if the finance is not there, you're not going to achieve it anyway. So it'd be interesting to see from this criminal justice, but whether you have an influence on putting back some of the finances that were taken away from them to allow them to move that justice system forward. Will you, in this particular case, fly the flag for those people that you talk about and care about, the people who are waiting for justice, that you will ensure that there's sufficient finance to be able to do that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, obviously the financing of other bodies is out of my hands. It is in the hands of central government. But the answer is yes, I do meet with ministers on a fairly regular occasion. And indeed, I do lobby them both on behalf of our own budget, but I've also been known to lobby on behalf of other bodies within our force area where things are needed.
Mark, come back.
Yeah, just one very quick question with regards to future reports. It would be interesting to see how the new criminal justice compares to the old system that we had. So whether or not you can actually directly say that we have made a difference with these changes, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from panel on this? Okay, we're happy to note this. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to item 9, which is the Community Safety Partnership funding update. Mr. Matthews, you're going to introduce.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will just do a shorter introduction, if I may. Once again, we're dealing with a system which I inherited. In this case, the system for funding community safety partnerships went back to the time of Sir Clive Loader, the first Police and Crime Commissioner. And in this case, we had a system where we were distributing fairly large sums of public money using a formula that nobody understood and nobody could explain. As I've previously indicated to this panel, I find that quite unacceptable. That is why I would particularly like to thank Saj for the work that he has done in developing the new system. And I would also like to put on record my thanks for the community safety partnerships across our area who have engaged so positively with the work that Saj has been doing and working so productively that we're able to get into the position where I'm able to bring this paper to the panel today. The new system that we are suggesting will improve accountability, improve monitoring, improve transparency, improve outcomes, improve value for money, improve opportunities to learn from past projects, improve certainty over distribution criteria, and it will also, I hope, reduce the underspends that we have sometimes seen in the past. With the backing of this panel, I look forward to working with our community safety partnerships right across our area to deliver improved safety for the many and diverse communities across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. Thank you.
Thank you. I know Serge came to the CSP conference that we had at the end of October, where you went through this in great deal to all the members that were there. So I'm sure most members here have listened to that and understood the formula that you've come up with to ensure, and that the process about CSPs bidding in for money. And obviously, if we just talked about commissioning, it's very similar, but a much more straightforward of the CSPs commissioning their work, what they're going to actually do. So any questions from members? Melissa?
Oh, my.
There we go. I think I'm in now. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for introducing the paper. I read it with great interest. As you know, I'm not involved in kind of chairing any CSPs, so apologies if my questions have been covered in other meetings. I think I was. There are a few things that really struck me. Obviously, the 40k thing, the cut of 40k to Leicester is a really tricky thing to understand in the context, for example, of violence in Leicester East. It's even trickier to understand when there are posters in all my local parks saying, if you don't feel safe, women, please report it to us. It's a very tricky thing to take money out of community safety in the city. So my question is, I understand there are all these metrics. I've got a few questions. My first question, apologies, is given all those metrics, have we actually sense test this about the impact that it will have in the city? My second question is that in the article that was attached to it, which I read with real interest, it talked about, for example, looking back over a 5-year period, and we've gone back over a 3-year period. And there were also some figures that percentages we were kind of running the figures on 65, 20, 15. And I wondered if there was an element for perhaps of subjectivity in those, because the article itself suggests 5 years. And if we ran those figures in a different way using different metrics, whether the city might have ended up with a fairer deal here. I think the other thing is that it feels a real shame that some of the things are missing in this that are qualitative when we've just gone for a hard data approach. For example, the article itself points out that there's a failure to separate specific types of victims, for example, domestic violence and crimes against children. And we know that those are underreported historically everywhere, crimes. And I just wondered that some of our most vulnerable people and at risk of the worst crimes might be getting lost when we just take a pure data approach to essentially stuff that affects humans, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll hand over to Serge in a moment to do detail, but I'll just pick up on a couple of things. The city does get a fair deal under this system, so it's difficult to get a fairer deal when you're already getting a very fair deal. If the council would like to explain to me how the previous system was worked out, I'd be delighted to hear, because none of us in my office have any idea how this worked. So yes, there is a reduction in money going to the city, as I hope we have set out not only here but at the conference to which you referred. We are taking an evidence-based approach to this, whereas previously nobody knows what the system was, quite frankly. And I would also inform this panel that the city has in the past underspent its allocation. And so trying to complain there's a cut when they haven't always spent all the money in the first place, I think is not particularly helpful. As regards the running of the figures over 5 years or 3 years, I will turn to Serge for any comments he might want to make.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for your question, Melissa. In terms of the first question that you asked, sense checking, yes. So prior to us coming up with this system, we effectively held meetings across all CSP areas, invited all partners to attend. Every single CSP that I met with, I took upon their feedback in terms of how they'd like to improve the current model. And it was based on that feedback we came up with this system. So our original approach was to consider a commissioning-based model. As panel members may or may not be aware, there's no statutory obligation for the PCC to give this funding, but we do it because we want to support the CSPs in the work that they do. We recognise the value that they bring, and we felt that continuing to fund them was the right thing to do. But we needed to rework this formula. As the Commissioner has mentioned, we don't know what the current system is, and I think that's indefensible. How do you defend something you don't understand? And there's no way for us to say this is how we've worked it out. So we would have had to come up with a new system. And in this formula that I came up with, after I've completed the consultations with each respective CSP area, I've presented them this for feedback. I don't think I had any criticisms that were able to actually pinpoint anything actually wrong with the way we've worked it out. Yes, there were criticism in terms of the city, in terms of the reduction that they've had. But as the Commissioner has pointed out, they've had quite tremendous underspends. And just to kind of put this into perspective, at the last CSP meeting, which was only a couple of weeks ago, November 30th, which I attended, they were saying we have a 45 grand underspend. How do we spend this? Now, that says to me this formula is pretty much bang on, because we're approaching the final quarter and they're looking at ways to spend approximately 45. What I've actually come up with is just a 39k reduction. So in terms of the formula, I think it's pretty accurate. And I've shared the formula with everyone. So before, no one knew how they were getting their money. No one knew what other areas were getting. So I've been completely transparent across all the areas. They've seen the calculations for themselves. They've seen the calculations for other districts. There was no criticisms in terms of the formula itself. And so the answer to the first question, sense check, yes, it was sense check. There was no major criticisms in terms of I suppose, the process and the framework that I'd come up with. The second question that you asked was around the 3-year period. We felt a 3-year period gave us a good snapshot of what the current environment's like, because it takes into account pre-COVID, during COVID and post-COVID, and what the landscape looks like. And we've done that as a sum. So taking that information, it gives us a really good idea of what the landscape is like currently. I mean, the further you go back, you start getting historical problems that may not be relevant. So we need to kind of factor in what's happening now rather than going back into too far into the back, because I mean the current formula we're using was created 10 years ago. The landscape's changed. We've got issues with county lines. We've got knife crime that's, you know, shooting through the roof. So we kind of have to look at what's happening in the immediate presence right now. Sorry, the third question I didn't quite capture. You mentioned.
It was about a failure to separate within the formula to separate out specific kinds of victims of crime, particularly those who are worst affected by some of the, you know, about women, domestic violence, crimes against children.
Sure, thank you. So that's exactly why we've used the crime harm index. So for people that may or may not be familiar with the crime harm index, it's probably the best way to weight each and every single individual crime. So if you take crime per 1,000, the problem with rating it just on crime numbers, for example, you can have, and this is the example I've used previously, you can have about 1,000 crimes in one area, 1,000 crimes in another area. But if the 1,000 crimes in area 1 is murders compared to the other 1,000 crimes being bike thefts, obviously area 1 needs more focus and attention. So that's why we've used the crime harm index, and we believe that it's a fair way of trying to capture the most harmful, severe crimes that are happening in LLR. It is not a perfect formula, but it's better than what we have now, which is we don't know. You know, we don't know what the current formula is.
Yeah. Thank you, Saj, for that, and thank you, Chair, for letting me in again. I guess I'm still keen to understand. So there's three things again. Sorry. I'd love to see the figures run over 5 years and see if they play out differently, please. I'd also like to see them with different financial different splits over those percentages. So 65% for the crime harm index, 20% and 15%. And just to try and understand why exactly those specific numbers have been used, because they aren't mentioned in the article. But what is mentioned in the article is that this system, this Cambridge crime harm index, specifically has built within it a failure to separate specific. I read it in the article. It's almost a direct quote from the article. So you're telling me that it treats crime as equal, but it doesn't, because it says itself there's a failure to separate specific kinds of victims, particularly those who are affected by domestic violence and crimes against children, crimes that we know are traditionally and nationally has always been underreported, but the impact of those crimes can be absolutely catastrophic. So that's that isn't what this does. And even though you're saying it, the article you shared with us says that. And then finally, you know, we're talking about a wish to improve all these things, but it feels very it feels at best arbitrary and at worst politically motivated to be taking money out of the city at the moment when we have violence on the streets of our city and we do not feel safe in our parks and parents divert on the route home. You know, it isn't, it's my city and I love it, but it isn't without its problems. And this does not feel like a fair settlement that will improve the crime and the policing in that city. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I may come back on that. This is a result of a long process. The community safety partnerships have been consulted extensively about any new system, how it's going to work, and different measures within it. I'm not prepared for my staff to spend time now seeking to run different options and different ways of doing things. All of that has already been done. All of that has been discussed with community safety partnerships. It is now time to move forwards with the new system to ensure that everybody gets a fair share of the cake, that everybody that we work with knows exactly where they stand, and that the people across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland do get a system that delivers community safety for them. Taking up the point about money being taken out of the city, I've already explained that the old funding formula nobody could understand. Through you, Chair, the councillor has herself not taken up my challenge of seeking to explain it to me, and we are looking at a new system. I must also make the point that for those who are listening and aren't familiar with some of the jargon we use here, this is talking about only the funding that goes to community safety partnerships. That is only a part of the funding that my office puts into the city of Leicester. We fund many projects, we commission many services, we do a huge amount for the people of Leicester and the people of Leicester East outside of the system for community safety partnerships. I'm talking off the top of my head, Chair, but I'm happy to go away and find the figures and come back another time. But I'm fairly confident that I can say that the total amount of funding coming from the OPCC, which is spent in the city of Leicester, is between 50 and 53% of total funding. And given that the population of the city of Leicester is 30% of the whole, that represents a massive overinvestment. As the councillor says, there are problems in the city of Leicester. We all recognise that. And that is recognised in the differentiation in funding going into the city of Leicester in an attempt to deal with those problems. As regards the violence which has unfortunately taken place in the city, perhaps through you, Chair, I could reassure members of the public of what I have previously said, that the Chief Constable and I have agreed that there will be an internal review of the policing of that violence. The results of that review, once operationally sensitive information has been redacted, will come to this panel and therefore will be entering the public domain. I've also announced that we will be undertaking a review ourselves of the services that we carry out and how that is done, with a view to helping with the situation in Leicester East. And I might compare that to the actions of the Leicester City Council, who started a review, then stopped it, appointed a chairman who then had to stand down. And at the moment, neither I nor the public know what's happening with that review, who's in charge of it, when it's going to report and what it's doing. So I think if city councillors want to come here and try and point the finger at politically motivated decisions over violence in Leicester East, they could look closer to home to start. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in Rutland, it would be really nice to have an underspend of 45,000, given that we've been allocated 19,000 for the whole county. But be that as it may, my question was with regard to long-term indications about support towards initiatives such as the Youth Diversion Project, because in Rutland, whilst we do have low crime statistics, we do a lot of work with youth diversion, and money from the Office of the PCC is very helpful in that. So I just want assurances that we can still expect support in that context.
I think the answer is yes, but Saj.
Here we go. Yes is the short answer. We've amalgamated the two contracts, so that doesn't mean you don't focus on youth diversionary activities. It's just a case of you now have more flexibility. So to take City's example, they got approximately 75,000 in their youth diversion contract, and we've amalgamated it with their core contract. That doesn't mean you can't use that 75k or more now on youth diversionary activities. It just gives everyone the flexibility to use the money however they want. They get one single pot rather than a certain section that's been sliced off just for youth diversionary activities, because some areas might have money for youth diversionary activities, but they need to focus on other emerging threats that are taking priority. That having that pot there would not enable them to do that. So point of it is it's hopefully giving you more flexibility. So you've got it as one single pot now. Use as you wish.
Sarah? Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to come back around the point around the disorder in East Leicester. I'm sure that the Police and Crime Commissioner is aware of the fairly considerable amount of hateful bile that was put online about the person who was appointed to be chair of the panel, who had to recuse themselves partly for their own safety, I think, as much as anything else. And that the council is working closely with the police, with other partners, working with the Home Office and other government departments to make sure that any review that is carried out can be done so with somebody appropriately who can be agreed upon across the piece. Whether that is done nationally or locally is still in discussion, but I think that I'm quite surprised by the Commissioner's comments, because that discussion is happening with colleagues in the police to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'd just like to extend my thanks to Saj, actually, because I know I gave him a really hard time when we had our meeting over Zoom. I think it's it has been a very complex process for you, trying to keep everybody happy, and that cannot be easy because we're all competing for pots of money, aren't we? But I'm just grateful for the work that you've done, and grateful from our perspective. So thank you for the work you've done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Simon?
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, I'd just like to thank Saj and Rupert, because clearly having a formula that nobody understood it wasn't acceptable, and this seems to me to be a very equitable way of doing things, completely fair. As it's been pointed out, you don't have to fund us as CSPs, so we are very grateful for the money we've given. So just like to extend my thanks. Thank you.
Les?
Thank you, Chair. I only have a very simple observation, because I never play politics in any of these committees. I was there when Sarge presented this at the CSP conference, and I personally thought it was a fairly progressive way of viewing the world and how funding formulas should work and be distributed. But it's new. Picking up on Simon's comment, if you don't know how the formula works, how can you possibly allocate funding moving forward anyway? Because you don't have a baseline on which to work from. So my only question really for the Commissioner and his team is, basing funding on a weighting mechanism with the crime index and population and dilly makes perfect sense to me. I'm fairly sure, Sarge, most of your conversations with the CSP were actually with the officers, not as elected members, and therefore they are all non-political and would have just fed into the system, their world as they see it. So my only question really is, because the world evolves, certainly in my world and my area, I'm seeing issues that historically I would never have seen. And I expect them to actually wash through. I think there's just a post-pandemic thing that we need to wash through one way or another. So my only question is, the 65, 20, 15% mechanism, you have the ability to vary that as new crimes, new events, new risks come forward or evolve, and actually it would just automatically reassign and reallocate funding in different weighting mechanisms. That's my only question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your question, Councillor. The short answer is yes. And you see, that's the beauty of it. I've designed it in a way that we can think ahead. So if there are changes, whether they're political or not, and whatever the priorities that are set, we can adapt this formula. So we now have something that we can literally just feed numbers in. And it's 3 numbers. We'll adapt the formula accordingly. And we could just assess, what crime rates, how they've changed over maybe a 5-year period. crime per thousand, and we can pull the data from niche as well in terms of the crime harm index. So we have effectively a template that we can just put simple numbers in.
Thanks, Ash. So exactly what's going to become really evident, and I think all members around the table will be very conscious of this, is the future of housing distribution will be much greater in the county authority area than it will be in the city area by default. So actually that weighting mechanism needs to shift with the population as it grows. So it seems to work for me, Chair. As with all these things, it's new. The proof will be in the eating. It's as simple as that. So thank you, Chair.
Like you say, with anything new, there's always going to be winners and losers, and obviously the winners are happy, the losers are not, and that's always going to be the case, and that's the bottom line of it. Melissa's point about rerunning figures, we haven't got time to do that now. Everyone's in their budget setting meetings. All the CSPs, Rutland City, need to be setting their budget. They need to know what money is available for them for community safety. So I don't agree that we should start rerunning. And obviously we had a very good conversation at the conference. Saj went through everything. There was opportunity at that point in October to raise any issues, but unfortunately no city reps were there. Only the districts and Rutland were represented on that day, and no one from the city came, where they could have fed in a little bit more. But I'm happy to move this, and I think at least we've got a formula. We can tweak it according to population, to crimes, etc. And at least we've got some basis to start going. So now I'm really pleased that this has come forward, and we get the panel to note it. Everyone to note. Very quickly, Ellie.
Yeah, sorry, with all due respect, Melissa's point wasn't only about rerunning the figures, it was actually about justification for the weighting, which was dismissed.
Yeah, so there were different variations that we put in. To put it into perspective, we would have to put the weighting at the crime harm index at over 85% for city to start seeing any benefit. So it doesn't make sense to throw any more money potentially at an area that's had underspend, sometimes up to about 100 grand underspends. So it just seems a bit probably indefensible for me to potentially set up on a figure where perhaps only 3 areas would benefit. And when you start going over 85% on the crime harm index, I think there's only 2 other areas that would benefit. You've got about 6 other areas, county areas and stuff, that will start to see decreases in their funding. And it's at a level where it's almost pointless giving them any money then, because you can't really do anything with it. So this seemed like an even, fair split. And as I pointed out, with a meeting 2 weeks ago at Safer Leicester Partnerships, they were talking about how do we spend this 45k. So I think, like, when you put things into perspective, I think it's a fair balance. And I say this having grown up in Leicester myself, and being a fan of the city. So.
I've sit in many meetings where people sit there racking their brains about how to spend money, and it annoys me tremendously. And it's ridiculous that people are sitting there thinking, how can I get rid of this money I'm allocated that's public funds because I haven't spent it, because there's no need for it. So there's other areas that do need it. So I'm happy for the panel to note this comment, and we'll move on. OK, on to item 10, the People's Report. Mr. Matthews.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, well, as I've said to this panel previously, People's Zones is something which, again, I inherited, and one on which I'm really very keen. I think as a concept, it's very exciting. I think it has the potential to deliver some great benefits to some of the more deprived areas within Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. I think that what's happened in the past is that perhaps it's been slightly under-resourced. When I became Police and Crime Commissioner, I found that there was one member of staff who was working on People's Zones, and only in a part-time capacity. She had a lot of other demands on her time, a lot of other responsibilities. And while she is a highly competent and very hard-working individual, quite frankly, the amount of time she had to give to People's Zones simply wasn't enough to do justice to the concept. I think that for People's Zones to really make an impact in the areas that they cover, we needed to have more resources and proper leadership on this scheme. So before I hand over to Chief Inspector Streets, who I'm delighted to say has taken up that challenge, I would first of all like to thank her and her team for all the work that they've been doing in recent months to get this paper into a position where it can come here. And on a slightly more personal note, I'm sure the panel would like to join me in congratulating her on her recent promotion to Chief Inspector. Chief Inspector Streets.
Congratulations.
think my mic's.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair. I'll just take it as read that the paper has been read, but there are a couple of updates that I can just bring to add to the paper as well, because obviously this was read a few weeks ago. Excuse me for my voice as well, so I'm losing my voice slightly. So point number 12, the Bell Foundry research report has now been completed, and we've shared that with the steering group and also with the partners. Now it's a 53-page report, so I haven't attached it to here because you've also got quite a lot to read. But what we're doing is working through a bit of a summary so that we can bring that to partners to kind of reduce that report. The new parks report will be completed before Christmas, so I've seen the draft of that and that'll be ready to go out soon. And then the Thringstone and Whitwick one, again, that'll be done before Christmas, but we'll release that early next year. Point number 17 as well, the community leadership programme, which I've mentioned, which People Zones do support, along with the Violence Reduction Network. So the community leadership programme have now recruited for cohort 3, and we have their induction evening tonight. So there's been 20 people across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. I'm really proud to say that 3 of those are actually across the People Zones as well. And the previous cohorts that we've also had people from People Zones, which is brilliant because it helps with the development of the project, but also it's about asset-based community development. So if we're upskilling the people that live in the area, they can help support People Zones and also the community around them. The final thing that I just want to draw your attention to is Appendix B of my report, which is a screenshot of the community asset map. Within the report, there is a link embedded in there on your digital ones, which basically takes you to a community asset map, which is developed already for Bell Foundry. We're just developing the new parks one, and then obviously we'll go on to Thringstone and Whitwick. But the asset map is basically a one-stop shop, and community can upload all information about events, services. Partners can update information on there as well. And the information on there is accessible at all times, and you can filter out all the information as well. So I just encourage people to look at that because it's actually really helpful, and it would be good for me as well with people around this room to be able to support that map, because actually we're getting quite a lot of good feedback from partners. So there's just a couple of things that I just wanted to draw your attention to and update on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And it's really good to see that the People Zone sort of finally getting some focus and some funding, because they've been hanging around even when I was a CSP chair for so long, but not really had any movement. They've just been hovering there and not really going anywhere. So I'm really pleased to finally see, because I think they are really good. But it's good to see some focus and funding, and the local people, I think, are the ones we can start them off, but they need to carry it on, don't they, in their local community. So that's really good that we're getting some community leaderships there for everyone to keep their local area safer, and for someone to go to, isn't it? That's that well-known face in their local community if they need some support. I really like the asset map. I think that's brilliant to find, what's around the area, and for people that are new to the area, just to find out what there is, where they should go, and things like that. So really welcome this report. Any comments from anyone? Lee?
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. I entirely agree. I like the People Zones. I've visited a couple of them. I think there's just a couple of quick questions though, because it's one of the things that this takes me back to is a comment that I made quite early on when I joined the commission, which was about frontline policing and the numbers of frontline policing. I recall sort of just showing some concern because there are communities, and these are perfect examples of those communities, where actually having a police officer who is physically out there on the street helps build resilience. And this is what you're talking about in here. You're talking about building resilience within a community. And whilst this is good for these particular areas, I still have concerns about numbers of frontline policing, particularly since I recently did a patch walk in an area which I represent, and I can't remember what rank or officers they were, but they'd normally have a team of 5, and that had been reduced down to a team of 2. I think 2 were on long-term sickness and 1 was on pregnancy leave or something. And so I was just wondering, I know that you had mentioned, Deborah, when we brought this up last time, that there was some place I could go and look and see what this plan was in terms of what Rupert was saying, Mr. Matthews rather. So I was saying about how we're going to utilise those community police officers. I just wondered whether we could see that. And also, I just wouldn't mind having a chat with you about some other items that can maybe be added into a report to come to this panel. The other comment about the report was just about the fact you've got 50k per year allocated to each of the projects. I just wondered where that money went to and how it is accounted for, because from my understanding, the money for the Bell Foundry one, which was used to employ somebody 5 days a week in an office, again, you know, to do some of the work that we've been talking about, has actually been reduced now to 2 days a week. So I'm just wondering where the accountability for the money goes. You know, who's accountable for spending it and reporting back to you, and do we know where that money has gone to?
I think what I was referring to was the police and crime plan. All the information in there. And just picking up on your point about your particular area have gone down, I think that's really a conversation you should have with your MPA commander about the local area, that operational local area, that they would be able to help you with those sort of issues there.
I think, if I may just come back, Chair, and very happy to do that, but I think my point was broader than that, about sickness levels within the police force and how that's impacting our communities.
Who wants to pick up the other points?
Right, thank you, Chair. Well, you did take the words right out of my mouth about small scale area things. However, I would like to repeat, you know, my reassurance that I think actually community policing is absolutely essential. I hope I have demonstrated over the months I've been in office, not only that do I believe in community policing and neighbourhood policing, but I'm actually written the police and crime plan, as you refer to, and providing the funding to make that happen. And indeed, certain instances here and there would back that up. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention about the important work being done by PCSOs in this respect, and particularly within the people zones. I've met with the PCSOs who cover those areas. I'm very impressed by them, and I think the residents are also impressed by the work that they do. For the more detailed points, I'm going to turn to Chief Inspector Streets.
Thank you. So just in regards to people zones and policing, all of the local teams are actually linked in with people zones, and we do actually have a representative from each of the areas on the steering group. So that will help, because if there is a gap with policing, then we can help support that and we can help build that in as well. Just in regards to the funding aspect, so we don't actually, well, the OPCC don't actually fund the lady at MTC. I know there is a request for us, People Zones, to fund those additional days, but actually People Zones is about asset-based community development, and it's about what the community's feedback is. So what we've done is we've taken the research from the community, and then we will launch the grants process in January next year, but it will be based around what the community are asking for. So what we want to look at is those grants to be spent on the things that have come out so far for the Bell Foundry, which is safety, mental health provision, and supporting that side of things. So we're not there, the money isn't there to fund people's wages, it is about putting it back into the community.
Charm to pay for the MTC staff.
No, the 50,000.
The staff at the MTC is funded by Charm.
Yeah, so that money that I mentioned in here is not actually being spent because it will be launched in January, and then obviously there'll be a new budget for the following financial year, and we'll look at how that grant process works as well.
Lee?
Thank you. I guess I'm a little biased because obviously Bell Foundry is part of Charmwood, but doing regular patch walks around there, it's, as we know, and obviously the focus with People Zones and the project, Chief Inspector Streets, I'm really pleased that you're working and you have worked with us there. It's absolutely great. And I think it means a real significant dedication from yourselves to the community. And I think it's a refreshing fresh pair of eyes look at Bell Foundry and see what we can do and what the local community can to do. I think we've done at least 2 patchworks with Mr. Matthews as well, at least. That's just with us and never mind on your own. And I think I really appreciate that because it gives hope to those people in that priority neighbourhood, a real hope, and thank you.
Sarah?
Thanks, Chet. I'm a massive supporter of People Zones. I think they've got some huge potential to bring them in. I was really delighted when they were brought in by the previous Police and Crime Commissioner and that recognition of where that additional support can make a huge difference. It was just a particular comment around the websites, which really useful. I hope they'll cross over with other ones that are used in the area because I think different communities access information differently. So for example, in New Parks, I'm aware that the Facebook feeds tend to be used far more than the websites do. So there might be some local information that can support the development of that. But in terms of the community assets, just 2 things. One, it's clear that most of the assets that are mentioned are physical assets, they're buildings, and helping communities recognise their assets as themselves, I'm sure, is really key in this. But in terms of some of those buildings, they're all ones that do not have involvement from a significant way from local authorities. So schools aren't included, for example, which for New Parks, I don't know how many colleagues know New Parks well, but certainly New College is a huge community asset. It's open at weekends, it's open in evenings. It provides a massive resource to the local community alongside a number of the other schools, the local library. And I just wondered whether there was a deliberate decision to not include those sorts of community facilities and assets as well. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, these apps are developing, so we're asking that community leaders, residents, anyone can actually add onto those maps. So there's absolutely no reason why that can't be added at all, because what we're trying to generate is a one-stop shop, because as you mentioned already, there's lots of different information and lots of different groups that are out there already. It becomes a bit of a minefield. When you're looking for a certain thing, you can't actually find it because there's so much information out there, which is great. But if we can put it in one place so that everyone can access it and you've got all that information, and when you look at the asset maps as well, it isn't just one place. So we've got a boundary because we need to have a boundary to be able to focus. But actually, outside of that boundary as well, we want to be able to create all those assets so people know what they can access. So, and it's everything, it's events, it's different services, schools, colleges. So it will be everything. But we're just growing that at the minute. So there's no reason why it would stop.
My sister. I think I'm sure certainly local councillors, but I think also local authority staff, and I'm sure that'll count for the other People Zones as well, will probably be good sources of information in terms of some of those wider assets. I suspect if I asked people in my local community, they wouldn't think to say a school was an asset because it's a school and it's not run by the community, but it absolutely is a community asset. So it might be that language sometimes becomes a barrier in these cases, but I'm sure there is support from local authorities to facilitate that information gathering.
Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I welcome a lot of the initiatives in the People Zone. Obviously, in North West, we've got the latest one with Whitwick and Fringston, and particularly positive about the idea of mini police. I think getting a positive impression of the police at a very early age can only be a benefit. My real question is, I still have quite a few people coming up to me who have heard of the People Zone but don't get what it is and what the vision. And it's what more can we do to sort of communicate what the vision is of the People Zone?
We'll fight over who's doing this one. I take the councillor's point, Chair. I think this might partly be because Fringston and Whitwick is still new and is still sort of quite a while behind New Parks and Bell Foundry in terms of this. I think I can assure the councillor, if he went to New Parks or Bell Foundry, as I do on a regular basis, the situation would be quite different. Our people who live there really do have a very clear understanding of what's going on and why it's happening. So time will tell, and obviously efforts will be put into Thringston and Whitwick to make sure that everything is brought up. I'm going to turn to Chief Inspector Streets again for the detail of what's being done, because, like I say, when I turn up at the other two people zones, what I notice is everybody does understand how they're told about it.
Thank you. Yeah, as the Commissioner mentioned, it is a very new concept for Thringston and Whitwick. So we do have a lot of work to do there, but we've got tremendous support from North West Leicestershire. We've helped do some joint events initially. What I think will help is once we get the research back, which we should have that in early January, that we'll be able to share that information. We've got a lot of comms work that happens as well through our own OPCC media channels, which get supported through North West Leicestershire. But we also have an animation video that we've created within the website as well, because it can be a little bit difficult to explain a people zone, and we recognise that quite early on. So we put together an animation video that explains people zones and what we're trying to achieve. But we hope with our partners, and we've had quite a lot of discussions in Thringston and Whitwick, that we'll be able to spread the word a lot more widely, and people will understand a little bit more about people zones. And as it starts to become more active there, that people will understand that a lot clearer.
It might be worth sending that animated video out to Anita and then sharing it with the whole panel, even though they haven't got, not everyone's got people zones. I'm sure they will spread, but it might be more able to understand. So if we send that on, we can send it out to panel members. Les, I had Salma first, sorry.
Thank you. I'd never heard of People Zone, so it's actually quite an encouraging initiative. I'm actually from the Belgrave area, and that would be an area that would scream out for something like this. Although you might struggle to get the right engagement from the community, but I think it would be somewhere that would really benefit from it. So my question was more around your next steps. What criteria are you using to find your next set of people zones, if that makes sense?
If I may, Chair, I don't think I've talked about this to the panel in any great detail. We do have ambitions to create another people zone. I know some preliminary work was going on at looking at different indicators that might be things that we would be looking at. So social deprivation would be one, the presence of institutions and assets that we could work with, and so on or another. That work is not very far advanced, I have to say, partly because we want to make sure that we get the model absolutely right before we start trying to roll it out elsewhere. Thank you for the question. I know that the name Belgrave did crop up along with various other places. I don't want to give you any great hope that Belgrave would be chosen, but any decision like that is quite a long way into the future, Chair, and obviously I would bring it to this panel before a final decision was made.
Thank you. Les.
Small observation, because actually I think people zones, and it was Lord Bark who introduced them, just such a brilliant idea, because it's about community, sense of community, belonging to and in a community, owning or being part ownership and invested in that community. And on that very point, is people zone the right terminology? Because it bears no relationship to community, is all I would observe. So back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. This was something that did crop up soon after I took office. As I say, back then, not a huge amount was going on with the people zones, and there was a concern that perhaps trying to build on the people zone concept and using them as something that had sort of, for whatever reason, rather languished. Perhaps it was time to relaunch it. Personally, I took the view that there's far too much relaunching of eye-catching initiatives, particularly by politicians. And I think actually it can give us politicians a bad name if we're constantly launching eye-catching initiatives and they're following through. So I thought actually, no, people zones is a name that is well known in some areas. It is a concept which is sound. I don't think anybody around this table would think that the concept wasn't a very good concept. And I didn't think it was any part of my business to try and launch an eye-catching new initiative when actually we had a perfectly good eye-catching initiative that just needed to be properly resourced and properly led. So I take your point, Councillor. I did consider all of this over a year ago now, but I decided to stick with the name that we got.
Okay, any more questions on this? Mark?
Yeah, just a small one. I found, whilst, as I say, I found that media is very helpful in this, and whether or not, because as I say, you've got 3 specific people zones, but it's an excellent initiative. And could it somehow be spread out into the wider community using, for example, the Next Door, which is a media platform that I use a lot where I am to spread the word and to that actually helps bring together community cohesion as well, and you can allay fears of antisocial behaviour and the like. You can encourage people to report. So I think that there's something that may be for a very small outlay. It's something that could be spread really out into the whole of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, a much more focused approach. And I just thought I'd put that into the mix, because with the one that I actively support, there are 1,300 individual families who are involved in that. So that really gets the message out to a lot of people, not just in Rutland, but also in Leicestershire and the surrounding county.
Thank you, Chair. Well, just as we do have long-term but unformed ambitions to have another people zone, we also have long-term but as yet unformed ambitions to be able to get down in writing which bits of this are working, how it's working, how councillors or local government officers might want to sort of pick and choose those elements of it that would be useful in their area. So again, good idea. It is something that has occurred to us. We haven't really developed it massively. And I'm going to confess I haven't spoken to the Chief Inspector about this for at least 3 months. Is there an update on we're thinking of doing it sometime?
So just in terms of your question, and that's really helpful actually, I've made a note of that, but we do, in the steering groups, we talk about how communities would like to be contacted or how they'd like to receive information. And actually all the research that we've done with the external company, they've gave us quite a lot of information. So for instance, in the Bell Foundry, people don't like to be communicated online. They like to have paper newsletters and things like that. And it's very different in New Parks. We get a lot of online engagement. So we know from that research that we've got some real good information that we can use to help formulate how we spread the word, basically. But looking at next door, that's a really useful bit of feedback. So we can look at that as well. But there's definitely lots of ideas. There's lots of buzz around how we can do things. We just want to make sure that we're inclusive of the community and where those decisions are made as well.
I think because these have been bubbling away for so long but not really gone anywhere, there will be a point where you'll want to do a whole evaluation of the project, won't you? But we really need to get them off the ground first before we do anything, and I don't think we're there yet, are we? So yeah, very happy to have an update and sort of 6 months, a year's time about how we're going at some point. Okay, we'll move on to item 11, which is complaints against the PCC annual report, which is Appendix F. So I'll hand over to Kamal. I don't think that's possible. We have a boiler issue, but it's to keep you all awake.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if am I? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Chair. This is an overview report. It's an overview of essentially the regime for dealing with conduct allegations against the Police and Crime Commissioner. Its intention is not to give an overview of the detail of, or even go into the detail of those complaints. Its primary purpose is to satisfy you as the Police and Crime panel that, first of all, we have a process, and that process, I'm satisfied, is compliant with the law and the guidance. It is a public, as in publicised process. It's published in our constitution. So I hope it achieves that. Secondly, it's to satisfy you that we do apply that process to actual complaints, through the regime whereby they are delegated to me to filter, and I engage with you, Chair, to decide what to do with qualifying complaints. But third of all, there is a purpose in bringing this to you each year, just to give you some, albeit light touch, indication of the volume of complaints that have been received in the previous calendar year. So I bring this report at the end of each calendar year. It's a brief report. The panel last year asked me to consider whether I could provide any more granular detail about the nature of complaints. I would have said to the panel this time last year that I'm happy to look into that, but I would need to deal with that sensitively, because it would be inappropriate, to go into the detail of specific complaints in a public forum. The Police and Crime Commissioner, as well as complainants, have the right to, for these complaints to be dealt with through the confidential processes that are agreed. I'm happy to say, though, that I did add a bit more context to the complaints that I've highlighted in, I think, paragraph 6. Mr. Matthews was more than happy to agree to the descriptions I gave to those complaints. And for completeness, I should say that although I highlighted 2 complaints in the last calendar year, the second of those was pending when I wrote the report, where I was deciding whether I even had jurisdiction to deal with it, whether it was in fact a conduct matter. Since writing the report and engaging with the Police and Crime Commissioner's office and checking the law and the procedures myself, I did decide that that wasn't a conduct matter anyway. So it boils down to 1 complaint, as highlighted in the report. I always get full engagement from Mr. Matthews in relation to dealing with complaints. It is a bilateral process. If I'm not entirely clear or satisfied about an answer, I will go back, and Mr. Matthews has always been willing to provide further clarity if sought. So I'm satisfied that the regime is compliant, that it works, and that it provides the level of accountability for the office and for the panel's role in discharging its jurisdiction satisfactorily.
Thank you, Kamal. Any comments? Okay, we're happy to note the report. Thank you. Okay, on to item 2, which is panel constitution terms of reference and review. So just a verbal up to date from you, Kamal.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yes, I haven't brought a paper on this for the simple reason that I don't have any amendments to propose to the Constitution. I hope you agree that that's generally a good thing. I think if I was proposing regular amendments to the Constitution, it might suggest that there was something fundamentally wrong with it. I have in 2 previous calendar years brought the report back for some substantive amendments. And it's right to say that within the context of the rules that govern these meetings, members do have questions, challenges about, quite how they hold the office of the Police and Crime Commission to account, quite how they get underneath the skin of various matters. And I do give advice during the year to panel members, either on an individual basis or collectively, on how we can do that. I did that more recently, a few weeks ago, and those things don't necessarily require amending the Constitution. Sometimes they simply require my illuminating rules within the Constitution that allow such and such to happen. So I've not been troubled by not amending the Constitution this year. My ears are always open to feedback about whether things should be done differently, and I will keep them open until this time next year when I bring another update to you.
Thank you. Any comments from anybody? Les? Are we all happy tonight? Okay. Thank you. On to item 13, which is the task group report, section 106 funding review, and this was sent as a second dispatch, so I hope you've all had a chance to read it. I'll just say a few words to start with, and then
maybe other panel members will want to chip in as well. But I just really want to thank the members of the panel who took the time and trouble to take part in the review, and it was good that it was across city, county and Rutland. So people that are on there, myself as chair, Piera, Kevin, Les, Lucy was on it for Rutland, and then when she stepped down, Mark took over. So I'm really grateful for their time. Also want to put on record my thanks to Anita. Without her focus and keeping me in line and all the work she did and the research she did in the background, I don't think we would have got to the point we got to. So I really want to put on record my thanks to Anita. So the review was prompted by a range of factors. Most keenly was the pressures on the budget arriving from the current economic climate that we were up against, and we were concerned that there was no Section 106 funding within the budget, no money being spent from Section 106, and that kind of asked the question, well, why not? And then once we opened that can of worms just exploded, and not quite as I expected to do. But we did find out that across LLR there was, I think it was £17 million worth of Section 106 that was either sitting in districts' bank accounts or in the forces bank account, but not being spent for the benefits of the residents of LLR from the developers that should have been. And there was just money sitting there for absolutely that people were just not even bothering with. So that we started to do a really deep dive into there. And I think what we found really was that Section 106 money is bidded for so far in advance that by the time you get to the trigger point to release that funding, what you ask for is not what you need anymore. And that was sort of the basis of what we found there. So what we were looking at was getting the money that the force had got in their bank accounts spent. So they came up with an investment plan about what the force needed and where that money needs to be spent. So hopefully they're getting on with that. But then there was also this money that was sitting in district's bank account that the force needed to get out of. And it really is about repurposing that money now, because a lot of that money that was sitting there is for buildings, which is what we need now. Cybercrime is one of our most prolific crimes across LLR, and we need digital vehicles and all that sort of expertise, and probably not police officers doing that, but other members of staff that are really trained in cybercrime and scams and all that sort of stuff that covers it. So what we finally got to was that we went to planning meetings where all the districts sit, and our view going forward is that what we need to do is put some resources in this, which basically is a person, whether that comes from the force or the office, PCC, but is to go through all these Section 106s that are sitting with all the districts and contacting the developers and asking them to repurpose that money for what the force actually need. So that's going to be a huge piece of work. And my issue and why I wanted it definitely to come to this meeting is because our request to you, Mr. Matthews, is to put a member of staff in to get this done, because it's time limited. A lot of these Section 106s are now getting close to where developers can ask for this money back. And what we don't want is that money to go back to developers. We want it spent for the residents of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. So I hope you've gone through the report. I know Mr. Nixon, Chief Counsel, really keen on this as well. He wants to get the money spent. He wants use of this money. So collectively, what we need to do is resources is our ask for you. So as you're starting to set your budget, I'm asking you whether it's a temporary role for a year, 18 months. I think once it's done, it's done. So it's not a long longevity of a role. It's just something that needs to be done fairly quickly within the next year. But I know the police coming out of this have now changed how they bid for Section 106 money. So I don't think we'll end up in this cycle again. So I'll just repeat, my request to you is to put some resources in there. Let's get this money spent for the benefit of the residents of Leicestershire and Rutland.
Thank you, Chair. Well, before answering your questions, perhaps I could put on record my thanks to the task group and the huge amount of work that they've been putting into this. Bits of paper and information keep coming across my desk as this process has been going on. You're absolutely right to highlight the issues. I think one of the earmarked bits of money was to equip PCSOs with Blackberries, which obviously technology has moved on slightly since that was specified. So yes, my thanks to the task group for all the work they've done on this and all the people who have been involved in it. The answer to your question is yes, it's in all our interests to get this done and to get it done as quickly as possible. I've read the recommendations on page 13 of your report. I think we're already doing most of it, and the bits we're not doing, we will do. So the answer to your question is yes, it's in the interests of the district councils, and city council and county council, of course. It's in the interests of the police, and most importantly, it is in the interest of the residents of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland we get this done. So delighted to be able to say yes.
That's great news. Any other members want to put any comments in? Les?
Me.
All right, so I'll come to it. No, I think it was, yeah, as a district councillor, I think the other side of what has come out of that investigation is actually, and it is highly relevant to the planning authorities, is agree the section 106 in an enabling format rather than a constraining format. And I think that's the fundamental change that we need to see washed through, because, you know, we are where we are. Force HQ is in my district, and we've got New Loverstock, which was £1 million to build something. We don't need anything building, you know. So I think it was a hugely valuable piece of work, and it's going to be really interesting to see how the developers react to the request to repurpose, and that's going to be fundamental. But equally, how we then strike the new deals going forward, which will be probably even more important, because society and the economy and the ecosystem is advancing at such a pace now that I have not a clue what it's going to look like in 3 years' time, let alone 5. So I think it's just a hugely valuable piece of work, and it will serve LLR very well and the residents of LLR, and indeed the police force in this particular instance, very well as we move forward. So thank you, Chair.
I think my recollection, Kira might correct me, is that the force are now just going to put a set price on per roof that's built for funding rather than to buy a building to buy this. So it's going to be a very wide, because you know, section 106 is really important and it's a legal framework that we have to work within. But saying you need some radios is force wide, isn't it? And digital is force wide. It's not. It will benefit that area where those houses are, but it's force wide. So that, I think, is how the force are going to bid for future section 106 Monday. So that will be very helpful. Mark.
Yes, just to say that I think this is a very important piece of work, as has been said by my colleague to the left, but it has highlighted, I think, not just in this particular context of the way that community safety is paid for through section 106, but it's highlighted across the whole provision of section 106 to the districts and to the city and to the county, the importance of keeping tabs on the money that we have and ensuring that it is spent as it should be and in timely fashion for the benefit of the wider community. So, as I say, I believe this piece of work hasn't just benefited the community safety element, but it's benefited everybody. And that's shown quite clearly in Rutland, where we've recently, we have a report is going to Cabinet, which has shown section 106, and we've actually starting to spend it. And some of it has been sitting there for a long time. So I thank this panel for that work as well.
I think it has woken a lot of people up, and Simon and I were at the National Police and Crime Panel Conference in October, I think. Oh gosh, I think times go so fast. And I mentioned it there, and so many other panels across the country were like, well, I'm going back to check mine now. So I think this will have repercussions from us as a trailblazer for getting section 106 spent. And I know Needs has had inquiries from the NHS, which I think are in, you know, similar sort of situations with money sitting in districts' bank accounts and stuff like that, that they're not spending or getting the money for. So this issue of money sitting elsewhere that's for the benefit of people that take the impact of development in the areas is huge. Sarah.
Yes, Chair, thank you. And it's a cracking bit of work from the panel. I think I was quite surprised by it. I've got to admit, Section 106 contributions that we receive as a council, as I think of as within my own ward, is something that we are quite fierce about making sure is being spent. PR knows because he gets badgered a lot to make sure that absolutely every penny is spent. And I suppose there is something for me around our collective might across councils and the parts of the police. If we have developers who are less than helpful when coming back to negotiate this, I would hope that the majority would recognise that the purpose of Section 106 is exactly that, to mitigate the impact of developments, and whether that is on radios or something else, it doesn't matter. It is around mitigating the impact of their development, and I would hope that we would be able to work collectively to put pressure on developers, and if needs be embarrass them if you get odd ones who are refusing to cooperate.
That was agreed within the panel. We have had one success. I think it was Odeby and Wigston, I think it was, where developers have allowed them, because you know they don't want to get called out in public, which they will be called out in public if they don't play ball, because that's money for residents. And yeah, no, we will be. But I really want to keep on the ball with this, so I would like a report back in 3 months about where we are, what your plan is, how you're going to do this, what you've done. So I think quarterly updates, well, pretty much to every panel meeting, I think. I want to keep this. I'm not going to let it go. This is my little baby, and it's going to come to an end when we get this money. So I really want to keep a tight rein, because the panel did work extremely hard, and I'm not prepared to let it slip. So we want regular updates, please. Any other questions from members? Liz?
It's just the final observation, and skip the reasons behind it. But if there's a demonstration that there is no such thing as a Blaby District Police Force or a Charnwood District Police Force, what recently happened in Leicester East, where a huge portion of LLR resource was pulled into the city to address that. And I'm fairly certain that the radios that were on the officers from Blaby MPA still worked. And that's the real demonstration for, if there's members of the public watching, it's an LLR wide resource, and it needs to be assessed and judged and seen as an LLR wide resource. So it's great.
Thank you very much for those comments. We'll move on. Okay, on to item 14, the work programme. So you can see our next meeting is the 1st of Feb there, which obviously our budget meeting. Efficiency savings on there, the PCC strategy report on estates, the governance update deferred from this meeting, and the ethics and transparency panel update deferred from the December meeting as well. Ellie, did you mention there was some items you wanted to raise to put on the work programme? Okay. Okay. Anything else that anybody wants to raise that they'd like to be considered work of the panel? No. Oh, sorry, didn't see you there.
Stuck in the corner. I was just wondering if, so I was reading about 1 in 200 frauds are actually result in a kind of sort of conviction or investigation or something. Is it worth looking at fraud and scams and that sort of thing, and how we're dealing with it?
This is a really grey area, because a lot of it is civil, which comes under comes under the county trading standards for scams. It's only the bits that are a criminal element that would come under you.
I think, Chair. I mean, I'm perfectly happy. I think I'm just trying to think how to do this. Perfectly happy to ask the Chief Constable to bring to our corporate governance board a report on how they're handling, as you say, those frauds that do fall under police. And once he's done that, then bring it here. I think the answer is yes, but with the caveats that you've put in, and perhaps if I could come back about timeline, some I doubt we'll get it to February, maybe the one after, but yes, but is the answer.
I think it might, once you've had, it might be worth having a chat first, but it might be something that they work with trading standards as well, because there are those two elements, whether it's criminal or civic. So a lot of it goes through the civil courts that I do.
It's also prosecute.
Yeah, so trading standards, they prosecute through the courts.
Criminal courts.
Yeah, through the criminal courts, but it's a civil action, not a criminal action. So go away, have a conversation. Then you might need to check in with me because trading standard sits under me at the county, so might be worth having a chat about that as well. Anyway, Sarah.
Thanks, Chair. I was just wondering if it would be useful to have an item to give Mr Matthews the opportunity to just show the structure, because I'm conscious you've had a number of changes of staff and interims and different things, and I think it's helpful. I'm sorry, I don't even know everybody that's accompanying you today, and we've not got nameplates, so it's quite difficult. I think it might be helpful to do introductions now, but it would also be helpful for a future meeting to just have that clarity over who's where in the structure, who's permanent, who's interim, just so that the panel understand that.
I think it's on the website, isn't it?
Yes, but not about whether it's interim or permanent. Happy to do that, Joe.
Actually, I'm just going back to the point about the cyber crimes and everything. Our role is to scrutinise the Police and Crime Commissioner, not the police. That's the Commissioner's job. So that grey area actually gets a bit greyer. So I think for us as the Police and Crime panel is to formally request from the Commissioner that he reports on the police forces management and response and behaviours of those areas of crime, because it's not our job to, so it is that horrible grey area between operational and the PCCs.
But the PCC does support victims. So looking on the other side, there is a huge amount of victims of that sort of crime that probably goes under the radar quite a bit, to be honest. So I think there's connections, trading standards. Yeah. So yeah, no, I think it sits across the board, but we can definitely scrutinise areas of it. Melissa.
And thank you, Chair, and forgive me again. I still feel new here, but because it crops up a lot, and we talk about violence against women and girls, and we talk about domestic violence. But looking at the agendas, looking back, like the work programme back and forward, it's not a specific item, and I think it would be really helpful to look at that. I know you've got your in connection to alcohol stuff that we've looked at, but I think it would be really helpful to me to have a broader overview of that and of that kind of crime, of how we're managing that, please. Thank you.
Got that jotted down?
Yes, I mean, it is an enormously important subject. It's very distressing. It does touch on a number of different areas. And of course, some of what we do when we're holding the Chief Constable to account is we do look at outliers, if that makes sense. If there's a sudden increase or sudden decrease, we'll look at that. I mean, again, the answer is yes, but because I think it is absolutely right that the people of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland need to be assured through this panel that the job's being done properly. It's just I always hesitate to give a firm assurance unless I'm clear in my own mind exactly how we're going to go about doing it. So it's a yes, but.
Gosh, you're offline in now, Sarah.
I'm wondering whether that could maybe link to the item we talked about before, though, around when we were looking at commissioning around particularly the helpline that's commissioned through the OPCC for victims of abuse and that broader. I'm conscious it's very much a partnership piece of work tackling violence against women and girls, but I think that element of it very much sits with your office, so maybe part of the way that could be led. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be, I'd still be really useful just to know who is here today for my own sense of, I've really struggled through the meeting not quite knowing, and I know, I'm sorry Anita, I know you didn't have a chance to get all the nameplates for everybody. Is it possible just to find out who is in the meeting? Sorry, Deborah.
Let me just take Les first and then we'll come to
Yes, Melissa. It's one of my red lines. No, just no. All that information, it actually comes through the CSP. We have regular, very detailed reports. So rather than create extra work, maybe there's an opportunity, because of course what we discussed in the CSP is inherently confidential. And there is a confidentiality statement that we have to comply with. But that data exists, very rich, very detailed data. So there may be some way of leveraging it out of the reports within the CSP without creating more work, if that makes sense.
Okay, any other questions on the work programme? Okay, so we'll move on to any other urgent visits, which I've said was the precept, and also within that, would you like to introduce the other members of your team that are here?
Yes, I'd be absolutely delighted to. So at this end, we've got Saj Devshi, who you've heard largely has been working on community safety partnerships and relationship between the OPCC and them. Got Kira Hughes, who is our temporary Chief Financial Officer. We've got Mike Veal, who is the temporary Chief Executive Officer. We've got Chief Superintendent. Oh God, I'm doing you a favor. Chief Inspector Streets, whose role within the office largely is to do with police zones, but also does a few other bits and pieces, and of course handles liaison between the office of the PCC and the police force. And at the end, we've got Charlotte Hycock, who is our absolute star when it comes to commissioning and all things to do with commissioning. But I do agree the lack of nameplates is perhaps not ideal. And not being too pedantic, but if you could turn it round, it would mean everybody else can read it as well. Thank you. Right. Thank you, Chair. Yes, as I mentioned to you, Chair, just before the meeting, about 10 minutes before I left the office to come here, I received an email from government, which is very early in giving us more detail on the settlement that we're likely to get. As is the way with these things, it's not in as much detail as I would have liked. This is, if you like, a preliminary announcement. We're expecting the full announcement next week. And I must hasten to add, we have not gone through these figures. So, you know, we really, this is hot off the press. But we haven't been able to do all the number crunching with it. So there are two things which I would like to report to this panel at the earliest possible opportunity, which is now, but with all the caveats I've put in place about we haven't really had a chance to analyse it. The first is that the percentage increase looks as if it's going to be somewhere between 3.5% and 4%. Okay. The other thing is that previously the government had been very firm on the fact that police and crime commissioners could increase their precept that they charge to the public by up to a maximum of £10 per property, Band D property. I've now been informed that I have the freedom to increase the Band D precept by up to £15. Now, obviously, that's quite a significant change. We are going to have to work through the ramifications of that. And as ever, Chair, I will be bringing a formal report on the precept rise in a few months' time.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll draw the meeting to a close now, and I think we'll just have a 5-minute comfort break before we start the confirmation hearing.
Good plan.
Thank you very much and welcome back to everyone. So we're now moving into the confirmation hearing for the role of the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. So we've been here not long ago for the Chief Constable, so it works pretty much in exactly the same way. We'll have an opportunity to ask questions this time of the PCC and also of the candidate for the Deputy PCC, but we obviously have no power of veto, so we can only make recommendations to the PCC once we finish the meeting. So we'll do the first bit in public where we'll ask questions of the PCC and the candidate, and then everyone will be asked to leave. We'll switch off the webcam streaming and we'll move into a private discussion period. Okay, so if I hand over to Mr. Matthews first, a short introduction, then we've got some questions for you, and then we'll have some questions for your candidate. Yes. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you. So any apologies for absence? Oh, you haven't got your mic now.
Apologies have been received from Parisha Chavda and Michael Mullaney and Adam Clark, who's sent to substitute.
Okay, thank
Sarah
you.
Russell.
Thank you for reminding me, Piera. Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? Piera.
Yeah, with respect to how I can put it to panel, whether this is a personal or a family friendship of mine with Mr. and Mrs. Mahal, which goes many years back, and we do actually share and invite each other to our social family gathering and event. And particularly one evening or year of my being Lord Mayor, I need to remind myself and declare that interest that Mrs. Mahal, with her another two good lady friends, organized a function for my charity where they raised £20,000 for one night event. Although I have not seen, I have not received, or neither Lord Mayor Office directly do that contribution of £20,000, but that was definitely paid to renal unit as part of my charity, where funds were actually donated directly from that. So in that respect, I feel that I should not take part in this meeting, and I would rather leave the room and go home. But
Okay,
but at the same time, as I said, being a good family friend, I wish Mrs. Mahal good luck.
Thank you, Piera. We'll just wait for you to leave the room and then we'll continue. Definitely be warmer there. Okay. Back over to you, Mr. Matthews.
Right, thank you, Chair. Well, as members of this panel will be aware, because I have commented on it in the past, when I was first elected to be Police and Crime Commissioner, I didn't appoint a deputy. And the main reason for that was that at that time there was a lot of talk that Police and Crime Commissioners might also be taking over governance of our fire brigades. And I was of the opinion that running a fire brigade would be a big job. Well, not running the fire brigade, but you know what I mean, acting in the governance nature of it, would be a big job in itself and would have a particular need for skills and abilities. And I thought that should it be that the central government would make police and crime commissioners take over governance of fire, that would be a suitable role for a deputy police and crime commissioner. And if that were to happen at that point, then I would look round to find somebody who I thought would make a suitable person to effectively do the governance side of fire. Once it became clear that that wasn't going to happen, then that removed the need for me to think in terms of fire governance in the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. It was already the case, and I'm sure everybody around this table is fully aware of the very different needs of the City of Leicester, the County of Leicestershire, and of course the County of Rutland, not only in terms of policing, but also in terms of many of the services that are commissioned by the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner, either directly or, as we've been discussing earlier today, influence that can be brought to bear and seeking cooperation with partners through the local criminal justice board and other various links and activities that I or my staff get up to. And it was largely because of that I felt the need that I should have a Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. Not every Police and Crime Commissioner does, but we are in a unique position where we are covering three very distinct and three very different areas, not only in terms of the local government structure, with Rutland being a separate county and the city being a unitary authority, but also the very different nature of those three areas. There are many police force areas. I think Lincolnshire is probably the most obvious one of our neighbours, where actually you do not have such a great difference in community, such a great difference in diversity in demand. So I felt I did need a Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner, and once the possible need to take fire into account had withdrawn, I was then looking around for somebody who I thought would be complementary to what are obviously my absolutely magnificent abilities in every possible respect, but I was looking for somebody who would bring something to the table, someone who would be able to add value to the role. And also, of course, I think it's important that on a personal level, it's somebody who I think I could work with constructively. I first came across Councillor Mahal when I was a member of the European Parliament. As Councillor Sinclair has said, very active in a lot of charity work, very active in her local community. And it was in that role that I first became aware of Councillor Mahal. Since then, of course, as with many of the people around this table, I've bumped into you when I've been wearing different hats and when you've been wearing different hats. And at all times, I've been very impressed by Councillor Mahal, by her dedication to the cause in hand, by her professional abilities, by the attitude that she takes to working to the betterment of the local community. And I therefore decided Councillor Mahal indeed would bring a lot to the table in the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. And because I have worked with her constructively in the past on various other projects, I thought that it was very likely I'll be able to work constructively with her in the role of Police and Crime Commissioner and Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. And therefore, I asked her to serve as Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. I'm delighted to say that she accepted, and therefore I recommend her to this panel to serve in the role of Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner, so long as I am Police and Crime Commissioner, which for all of us, of course, is in the gift of the great British electorate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. Welcome, Councillor Mahal. Is there any comments or anything you want to say before we go to questions?
No, just other than to say thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come here and speak and to be part of this hearing. And thank you to Commissioner Rupert Matthews for providing those kind words. Thank you. Yeah, I'm ready for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start with questions to you first. Mr. Matthews, so I'm going to start. So given the formal recruitment process is not required for the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner appointment, how can you assure the panel that you've taken a fair and transparent approach in proposing this appointment?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, well, I can only tell you what I did, I suppose is the answer to this. I sat down at my desk, and I know this is going to sound terribly sad, but I sat down at my desk and wrote out a list of the qualities that I thought a Police and Crime Commissioner would need from a deputy, and particularly, as I say, with the three very different areas that we've got. In my own head, I then ran through all the people that I know and people that I've worked with either formally or informally in various capacities, and drew up a list. I then went and chatted informally. I did not mention to anybody I was looking for a Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. but was trying to steer the conversation on to what they did, how they did it, and explore different avenues. I did that with a number of different people over a period of probably about 4 or 5 months, I think. Then sat down and thought about it all over again, because in my mind, this is a very personal decision. It is a decision of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and it is the Police and Crime Commissioner who has to work with whoever does become Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. Once I'd finished all of that, I was quite clear in my mind that Councillor Mahal was the correct person to approach. I then checked on all the various legalities and that side of things to make sure that I was acting properly in what I did. I then spoke to Councillor Mahal, explained why I was there, what the role was about, explained some of the requirements, some of the duties. I tried to make it clear how much work is involved in being a Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner, and that as with being a councillor, a lot of it doesn't actually happen during working hours. You do have to do a lot of other stuff as well. So having got through all of that, I then, I was about to say pop the question, but that's not right, is it? I then asked Councillor Mahal if she would be the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. She said she wanted time to think about it, which is perfectly reasonable. And having thought about it, she came back and said that she would. It was at that point I then started getting the wheels in motion, both in terms of my office, practicalities like where does she sit in the office, and of course communicated to you, and hence that's why we're here.
Thank you. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. What will be the key responsibilities which you intend to delegate to the DPCC, and how do you intend to manage and monitor their performance?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there are some things that I will want to delegate to Councillor Mahal. We've touched on some of them already today, so I think fraud and business crime is something that Councillor Mahal has some experience of. Violence against women and girls, while it is a subject on which I attach massive importance, I think there are some aspects of that Councillor Mahal would be better suited to deal with than me. There is a lot to do with just sort of the general day-to-day stuff where we will cooperate a lot. Plus, of course, the all-important when I'm away on holiday, Councillor Mahal will be stepping into my shoes. I think it's important to say, however, that the Police and Crime Commissioner remains responsible for everything. And while I am asking Councillor Mahal to take responsibility for various aspects and to undertake all sorts of duties, I wouldn't want the panel here to think that I was trying to evade my responsibilities, and ultimately I am responsible just as I'm responsible for everything that members of staff do within the office. So when you say delegate, I think you mean help me, assist me in various things. Rather, I don't want anyone to think I'm trying to get rid of duties.
Okay, Councillor Russell.
Thanks, Chair. Microphone first time. This time it's going better. It was helpful for you to send through the correction earlier to the information that had been sent through around experience and competence. It's just a couple of other bits it'd be useful to clarify for us. So it's got in there that Councillor Mahal's a director of the LEP. I understand that you sit on the board of directors. I think most of us would understand that those two are not the same thing. So can we just clarify that one? And I'm also conscious that in a number of the different sections around experience, particularly around scrutiny ability, accountability and oversight, the majority of things cited are political posts, which are not commonly put forward when we're looking at this sort of thing. And I just wondered whether you wanted to have the opportunity to expand on any other areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, you're quite right. Councillor Mahal sits on the board of directors rather than being an actual director, as with the confusion over district and parish council and what have you. So I'm perfectly happy with all of that. I think those of us who are involved in political parties understand that some of the responsibilities within a political party and holding political posts can be quite high. Occasionally, substantial sums of money are involved. A lot of responsibility can be there. And personally, I'm quite happy to put forward experience holding political posts as being indicative of the ability to hold posts, because having held quite a few myself, I know how time consuming and onerous they can be, and indeed the responsibilities that can go with it. So I'm perfectly happy to put those forward.
Okay, Councillor Phillimore.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Councillor. The role of the DPCC, I trust, will be quite demanding. So my question is, if you are appointed, can you assure the panel that, well, I'll rephrase that, are you going to remain as a district councillor? And are you able to assure the panel that your overall effectiveness will not be compromised by those two positions that you would hold? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. In that case, yes, this is something I have discussed with Councillor Mahal. I hesitate to say it, but a lot of councillors are district councillors and county councillors. So double hatting is not unknown in Leicestershire. I know it's less likely in Rutland, though I think you have some county councillors who are also parish councillors. Do you not? Yeah. So double hatting, as I believe it is known, is not unusual. I think a lot of it comes down to the amount of time the individual is prepared to devote to the various duties and responsibilities. I have discussed it with Councillor Mahal. I'm confident that she will be able to devote the time to being Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner that role demands. So yeah, I'm quite relaxed about that. I understand your concerns, but as I say, you know, it's not an unusual position, and I'm perfectly content.
Councillor Wellband.
Thank you. Rupert, you have frequently said that when asked that you did not want or feel that you needed to appoint a Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. What has changed in your thoughts for you to now want to appoint one?
Well, I hoped I sort of covered that in my preamble, in that the main reason I wasn't appointing one is I was waiting to see if we got, if PCCs were given responsibility for fire. That hasn't happened. And so therefore I'm not going to need a PCC to deal with that, or a deputy PCC to deal with that. On the more generic role, I suppose part of it is that when I first became a police and crime commissioner, I was hesitant about the whole idea of a deputy, partly because of fire, which then became more in the front of my mind, as at one point it seemed almost certain that the police were, that the government were going to give police and crime commissioners fire. And therefore I was holding off on that. But I think it's fair to say, actually, that until I became Police and Crime Commissioner, Rutland, if you will forgive me saying this, was a nice place to go and visit. And the scones that are served in Oakham Castle are absolutely delicious. And I hope the city councillors will forgive me for saying that the city of Leicester was somewhere to go shopping, somewhere to enjoy a nice meal, somewhere to go to the cinema. And it wasn't until I was Police and Crime Commissioner and the differences between them were brought forcefully home to me that I realised just how different these places are from a policing point of view. As a member of the European Parliament, I was looking after 6 counties, which is a much bigger area. And again, you know, I was getting to know Derbyshire and Lincolnshire and so on. So I think if anything has changed, one, it's a retreat of the possibility of us taking on fire governance. And secondly, being brought home to me forcefully just how different the policing needs of our three areas of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. And it's that has convinced me that having a deputy would be very helpful.
Councillor Oxley.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, following on from that question, is the PCC expecting the deputy PCC to take on roles such as attending community safety partnerships across the LLR?
As I indicated earlier, I would expect the deputy to deputise for me when I'm not here. There are, as you'll be aware, a lot of the demands on the time of a police and crime commissioner, I'm sure in due course, on the time for a deputy police and crime commissioner. Attending outside meetings is one of those, but there is a huge amount of internal work that has to go on. I mean, I know that it's your job to scrutinise the work that I do, and we do that largely through reports and the answers to reports. But behind each of these reports, not only do my staff do an enormous amount of work for which I'm very, very grateful, but there's a lot of input from the Police and Crime Commissioner to those things as well. I've indicated earlier in an earlier answer some of the topics which I'll be asking Councillor Mahal to take a lead on. Rather than take responsibility for, because the responsibility rests with me. So I think the answer to your question is yes, you will be seeing the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner at various events and meetings around our city and two counties. I think it would be unfair to say that I will be handing over to her because, again, as I keep saying, responsibility rests with me. But we will be a bit of a double act, yes.
Councillor March.
Thank you, Chair. Can you assure the panel that issues in the city are understood and will be represented within the office of the PCC, given that both yourself and your proposed deputy are from the county, please?
Absolutely delighted to give that assurance, Chair. As you will know, my predecessor had a deputy from the city, and which meant that neither he nor his deputy lived in Leicestershire, and I don't think anyone around this table would indicate that the county of Leicestershire was unrepresented. So, yes, I mean, I'm sorry, I thought my predecessor lived in Rutland. Is that not the case? I apologise in that case. In that case, swap it. He lived in Leicestershire, which doesn't mean that Rutland wasn't properly represented. Sorry, I misunderstood. So, yes. As I'm sure everyone is aware, you don't only know the area where you live. When I was a member of the European Parliament, I didn't live in Lincolnshire and I didn't live in Derbyshire, but I made it my business to get to know those places, to get to know particularly how the work of the European Parliament impacted on businesses and residents right across the East Midlands. Since becoming Police and Crime Commissioner, I've made it my business to get out and about, to understand how policing and the services that my office commissions impacts on people in Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. Every week I do what we call a community day, which is where I get out and meet members of the community. Charities are active in the community, parish councils, city councillors, county councillors and what have you. And once a fortnight I also go out with the police to understand more firsthand about the work that they are doing. And so, yes, no, I think I can assure you absolutely the needs of the city will be adequately represented. Both Councillor Mahal and I live within the Force area. The Force covers the city and two counties. And indeed, I'm in the city tomorrow visiting a mosque.
And the final question from me to you, Mr. Matthews, is how will you demonstrate the effectiveness of the role of the DPCC to the panel over the coming year?
With respect, Chair, it's your job to scrutinise our work. So just as you've been scrutinising my work as Police and Crime Commissioner, in future you'll be scrutinising the work of the Police and Crime Commissioner and the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner. So I think the best way to do it is to carry on as we have been.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. OK, so we'll move on to questions for Councillor Mahal. Yep. now. So I shall start again. So what relevant experience do you hold that makes you suitable for the role of the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner?
Thank you. Over the years, with whether it's voluntary, charity or council work, or indeed board member on LEP or on business associations, I've picked up various areas of expertise, be that in the business or financial, and basically all the experience from gaining from that is what I will use going forward for this role.
Councillor Finnemore.
Thank you. So, Councillor Mahal, and we have your updated CV, for want of a better phrase. Very broad brush, lots of what I would think was relevant experience. And of course, we know each other from our other worlds. But nothing to do with police and crime. So the question then really is, what experience do you have of policing and criminal justice, and how do you intend to proactively enhance your knowledge and understanding of these areas, which will be key critical as a DPCC? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that. No, I don't have any experience per se, but I do have experience as a user of the police service, be it in my life now, or in fact, if I go back to my childhood, we would experience things like domestic violence, domestic abuse, missing children, and any sexual exploitation, if I can say the word correctly. So in a number of ways, police is with us all. The effects of policing is with us all. And more so recently, you hear about all the things, the atrocities that are going on around the world and locally to us. So that would be my experience, and things that I have seen or heard as I was growing up, especially things like domestic violence, abuse, and things like that. And business and crime, knife crime, whatever you want to sort of say, things like that. I think just want you to sort of get to the bottom of it and see where you can help. And since being in the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner, as part of my induction, I've made it my business to look at every single area in the OPCC, whether it's the Criminal Justice Board, whether it's the Violence Reduction Network, whether it's the Association of the Police and Crime Commissioners. I've sat in on chief officers' teams meetings. I've had various meetings with the Gold Group on a number of events that have taken place, especially in the last week. So yeah, I make it my business to learn everything across the board. Anything I take it on with gusto. And I've given as much time as I can to this, but I'd like to think that I haven't neglected any other areas of my life as well. And that, with the family and children at home, I continue to do all of that as well as taking part in this. Hopefully that's answered your question.
Councillor Graham.
Yeah, I can have mine. Yeah, have this one.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mahal, what would be your key priorities during your first 5 months in this role?
Thank you. Key priorities, I guess I've mentioned some of them. I'll be looking at violence against women and girls. I will be looking at business crime and commissioning, oversight of commissioning, and partnerships and volunteers, the volunteers that go for custody visits, very interesting area as well. And as someone who's done volunteering, I think that's quite an interesting area as well. So yeah, and that's just to name a few.
Councillor Russell.
Mine still works, that's good. It's clearly not about how much you've used it this afternoon then. Given your understanding of working alongside the PCC, what skills and qualities can you bring to complement those of the PCC?
Well, I think being approachable. Outside as I was coming in, actually, I saw the signs of openness, approachability, trust, flexibility. If you're approachable, people will come up to you and talk to you. And I think part of the role of a police and crime commissioner or a deputy police and crime commissioner is that, first of all, in the first instance, you're approachable. Only then will people come up to you and share their concerns. So I think that's primarily the first thing. And secondly, I am what you see. What you see is, right in front of you. People in the community know me, and hopefully see that, this is me and they can approach me. And I have a sense of service. Anything I do, I haven't done anything for the money, so volunteering or charity. It's always been more sort of a personal development thing that I've done and for the good of the community. Yeah, I stick to my morals and values as well. Hopefully that's enough for you. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Oxley.
Thank you. Yes, whilst appreciating this role is a political appointment and therefore not subject to a formal selection process, how would you respond to any challenge regarding the transparency of the process and demonstrate that you are the best candidate for the position?
The Commissioner, Mr. Rupert Matthews, and I, we have a professional relationship. And so when I was asked, would I consider this, it reminded me, actually, women wait to be asked many times before they put their names down to taking on any role, because they always look at their CVs and wonder whether they actually have all the qualifications or not. So although I could have indeed gone out and, put myself forward to be the PCC, I didn't, because I know that certain elements of it, you need the experience. And so to actually become a DPCC or a deputy PCC, for me, is a good starting point. And I hope that I can bring all the experience that I have to assist the Commissioner in carrying out his strategic priorities of the crime plan, police and crime plan.
Okay. And do you have a second question, Mr.
Yes, what is your understanding of the relationship of accountability between the PCC, the Chief Constable, and the Police and Crime Panel?
So my understanding is that the Police and Crime Commissioner holds the force to account and accountability and their governance, and that the Police and Crime Panel is there to scrutinise and account for what the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner do.
Okay, Councillor Woodman.
Thank you. How would you intend to build effective relationships with stakeholders, including the community safety partnerships? And what previous experience do you have working with CSPs, and what is your understanding of their importance?
CSPs or community safety partnerships. Partnerships are generally important to work collaboratively is very important, and more so now, to share share services, and in effect, having partnerships, you're also having savings as well. But with all the roles I've done, again, as a councillor or director on LEP, partnership working is always there. In everything I've done, actually, working with other stakeholders and partners, I think that's something that comes naturally to me, to speak others. And so forming partnerships and relationships is seen as a good thing. Thank you.
Councillor March.
Don't worry, this one works. Thank you. And thank you, Chair. How do you intend to ensure that you represent all communities across the whole of the Force area, please?
Yeah, so although I live where I live, I'm very well suited to travel all across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, and have indeed done so over the last decade, if not before. So I'm quite familiar with all the areas of Leicestershire, and I like to think that wherever I go, I'm comfortable in the surrounding, and I think people are comfortable talking to me as well. The diverse community that we have, I'm comfortable with communities in Leicester and Leicestershire and Rutland, and the varying needs of those communities. I think being of one of those communities myself, it's easy to understand where what their needs are, and so I think I wouldn't find it at all hard to meet the needs of those diverse communities. Thank you.
Councillor Wellhand.
Thank you very much. As an elected councillor, you are able to represent your own views. However, acting as a deputy PCC, you will be expected to represent the views of the PCC. How would you ensure that you distinguish between those two positions? Thank you.
So obviously, as a councillor, when you have any conflict of interest, you would either remove yourself from the room and or highlight that. But obviously, in the role of Police and Crime Commissioner, I would put that at that moment my PCC head on, and the same with council. But again, I would like to think that I would make a independent decision on the job at hand rather than which hat I'm wearing.
Okay, and final question, Councillor Woodman.
Oh, yeah, that one works.
How would you approach a situation if your personal viewpoint conflicted with that you were representing on behalf of the PCC?
Sorry, could you rephrase that?
Okay, so let's try and think of a scenario. So if the PCC was putting forward a policy which you felt you weren't in full agreement with, how would you approach that situation?
So obviously we all have our own way of thinking, and there's always debate to be had and advice given back and forth. I will be a critical friend, and make my views known, and then hopefully we will come to a better solution.
Okay, that's the end of all our questions. Is there anything that you want to add that you haven't already covered?
No, I just hope that I've answered your questions correctly. Clarified. Thank you.
Mr. Matthews?
Yeah, thank you. On the subject of clarification, I said earlier I'm going into the city of Leicester tomorrow to visit a mosque. Actually, I'm going into the city of Leicester to visit an educational establishment attached to a mosque. So I don't want the panel to think I'm trying to mislead. Thank you.
Okay, we've got no more questions. So this is the public part of the meeting that we completed. So if we can ask all members of the public and the audience to leave, we'll move into our private session. Thank you. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much. Same to you.